And thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. President Trump was elected after a campaign that ran mostly on domestic issues, but foreign policy has dominated the early days of his office. And Trump seems to be making some progress. Dale Hurd is on this story.
The Kremlin says Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Trump agreed during a phone call to step up U.S.-Russian diplomatic efforts on Syria. It could signal a thaw after some, including the president, have said relations between Moscow and Washington are at an all-time low. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson in Saudi Arabia.
Well, it was a very constructive call that the two presidents had. Very, very fulsome call, a lot of detailed exchanges, so we'll see where we go from here.
The White House said the two leaders discussed setting up safe zones in Syria. The U.S. is also working with China on a stronger UN Security Council response to North Korea, including sanctions, after Pyongyang's repeated ballistic missile launches. The most recent missile test on Friday failed. And Congress has passed legislation that would intensify financial pressure on the North. Military pressure is also being brought to bear. U.S. Air Force B-1 bombers have conducted what are called presence missions near the Korean peninsula twice in the past 2 weeks, in a move designed to show North Korean leader Kim Jong-un what he's up against. A THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Missile System, is now operational in South Korea. That angers China, which sees it as a threat to its security, and Beijing has demanded its removal. It's even triggered protest by some South Koreans, the people it was sent to defend. The Trump administration has been greeted by so many foreign policy crises in its first 100 days. One political cartoon shows Barack Obama tossing President Trump a foreign policy hand grenade. In addition to North Korea and Syria, there's also Iran's nuclear program and ISIS, and none of them look to be resolved anytime soon. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
A meeting between President Donald Trump and Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas will take place today for the first time to discuss relations between Israel and the Palestinians. It's reported President Trump will press Abbas to end payments to families of Palestinians who are imprisoned in Israeli jails for attacks against Israelis. 3 senators, Marco Rubio, Tom Cotton, and Lindsey Graham, are arguing the U.S. cannot treat the Palestinians as a peace partner as long as they reward terrorists. Netanyahu also emphasized the meeting between the two leaders on Monday, urging Palestinians to stop funding terrorists who kill Israelis. Abbas has previously stated he believes a, quote, historic peace deal is possible under President Trump. Congress is expected to pass a $1 trillion spending bill today, but the new GOP healthcare plan is getting all the attention. The president is pushing for a vote, but House Republicans still don't have the numbers needed to pass the legislation. Republican Representative Fred Upton is one of the leaders who is pulling out of supporting the bill. The issue comes down to patients with pre-existing conditions. Under the new measure, states would be allowed to opt out of covering them. Democrats are claiming that as a victory.
The president is frustrated with the fact that he negotiated in good faith with the Democrats and they went out to try and spike the football and make him look bad.
The president is expected to sign the spending bill, but the health care bill remains a top priority for him. The Trump administration is reinforcing its support for Israel. In honor of Israel Independence Day, Vice President Mike Pence hosted a group of Jewish leaders at the White House Tuesday. Among those there were Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah, and the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. In his speech, the vice president talked about President Trump's deep love for Israel. Just last week, President Trump proclaimed the month of May as Jewish Heritage Month. Pence also spoke about moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel, a promise President Trump made on the campaign trail.
And the President of the United States, as we speak, is giving serious consideration to moving the American Embassy in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Vice President Pence says Trump is committed to resolving the Israeli and Palestinian conflict and will always make the safety and security of Israel a top priority. Megachurch pastor and television talk show host Bishop T.D. Jakes has some strong words concerning politics and the pulpit. At a conference in Dallas, he compared the current relationship between church and state to prostitution.
Isn't the problem that the church finds is that we find ourselves having to hook our wagon to one political side or the other when the truth of the matter is we don't totally agree with either side about everything. Isn't that the truth? When we attach our identity to either entity and act like this is God's choice for the body of Christ, we have really become prostitutes to politics.
Go ahead, Bishop.
You understand what I'm saying?
That excerpt was part of a panel discussion at the 2017 International Pastors and Leadership Conference, which included Pastor Paula White, Bishop Harry Jackson, and Joshua Dubois, the former director of the White House Office on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships under President Obama. Now, you can see more of that discussion at our website. It's cbnnews.com. Still to come, the true origins behind the growing movement to boycott all things Israel. You'll find out the answer to that question when we return. The UN has passed a resolution that denies Israel's claim to Jerusalem. In a measure passed on the same day as Israel's Independence Day, countries like Algeria, Egypt, and Sudan claimed Israel had no historical or legal ties to the city of Jerusalem. The UN's cultural body passed the measure with 22 votes. World politicians say the move is anti-Semitic. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is calling the resolution, quote, absurd, but says the small vote shows there is more global support for Israel. Well, it is one of the most powerful anti-Israel movements in the world today, the BDS movement. Now, that stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, and it's very well funded. It is also spreading across college campuses right here in the U.S. Dale Hurd returns now with that story.
BDS activists will tell you they're only defending the rights of Palestinians. But when they chant from the river to the sea, they're calling for the complete destruction of Israel.
Our movement, the BDS movement, the Palestine Solidarity Movement, is finally starting to reframe the conversation, and that's why they're so afraid.
The BDS movement is growing and has become a force on more and more college campuses. It is aimed at only one nation, the only democracy in the Middle East.
No other country, just Israel.
Richard Millett tracks the BDS movement through his website.
They won't be calling for boycotts of America, who they don't agree with, or British government policy that they don't agree with, before we get into China, Russia, Syria, Saudi Arabia. There is no boycott, Dale. So you answer why.
The answer to that question can be found in the answer to another important question. Who founded the BDS movement? BDS leaders say the movement was launched in 2005 by the Palestinian Civil Society, but the evidence shows that is not true. Ilan Pape is director of the European Center for Palestinian Studies at the University of Exeter in England. He's considered a leading intellectual in the BDS movement. Here, Pape admits that the Palestinians did not create the BDS movement.
We're also active in it.
Well, the Palestinians launched the BDS in 2005 and 2004.
Yes, not really, but yes, okay. For historical records, yes. Okay.
That's important.
It's not true, but it's important.
It is important, because if the Palestinians did not begin the BDS movement, then the question, of course, is who did? BDS expert Professor Gerald Steinberg in Jerusalem says BDS is a creation of European socialists and Muslim nations who oppose Israel, led by the 57-nation Organization of the Islamic Conference, the largest voting bloc at the United Nations.
They get together with the radical left, started with the Soviet Union, certainly filters over to the Trotskyites and the Labour Party in the UK, and many other radical allies. And the fact that this is in many ways a European radical political movement makes it even less legitimate.
There have been boycotts of Israel since before the creation of the State of Israel. Some even trace the boycotts back to Nazi Germany in 1933. But the modern BDS movement took shape at the 2001 UN Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa, an event so rife with blatant anti-Semitism that the US and Israeli delegations walked out. Kenneth Marcus is president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law.
People were distributing or selling copies of the so-called Protocols of the Elders of Zion. There were people there supporting Nazism and urging a return to Nazi anti-Semitism. From that movement, the new BDS campaign emerged.
Another key question is who funds BDS. Steinberg says the movement gets hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Some of its funding is difficult to track. But if you live in a Western nation, there's a good chance you help fund it through your tax dollars, and perhaps even your tithe. The BDS movement gets most of its funding from the European Union, European national governments, and even the U.S. government, who give money to NGOs or non-governmental organizations that claim to fight for human rights, but who also oppose the State of Israel.
Amnesty International, Ken Roth from Human Rights Watch. These organizations are funded by governments under the label of international aid, promoting human rights, promoting peace and development. The Swiss, the Swedes, the Norwegians, the British, Germans, up and down. The money there is huge.
Some Christian charities also give money to BDS. The webpage for Christian Aid makes it look like it only fights poverty. Drill down on their website and you'll find they also support BDS, as does the Presbyterian Church USA. And while the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement has been in one respect a failure, it has accomplished very little in the policy arena. It has succeeded in another area, by spreading anti-Semitism across college campuses.
What we're seeing increasingly is that BDS activists are intimidating student governments at colleges and universities to pay for their activities, and if they don't, there may be repercussions.
Aggressively confronting and sometimes assaulting Jewish students and faculty at pro-Israel events. Ronnie Fraser, founding director of the Academic Friends of Israel, warns the next generation of leaders is being brainwashed, that Israel is the worst nation on earth.
Students are being fed a diet of Israel is a racist state, Israel is a Zionist state, Israel equals the Nazis.
We support the Intifada!
With massive funding behind it, BDS is turning people against Israel and creating a generation of leaders who may someday try to carry out what some have said is the real goal of the BDS movement: the elimination of the State of Israel. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
A miracle for 1 million Chinese orphans. See how one village is changing the lives of special needs children. The story is coming up next. It started with a simple message from the Bible about caring for widows and orphans. Then 70 families in a small village in China set out to help children in a nearby orphanage. And as George Thomas reports, that became the model for a Christian organization to place orphans in families all across China.
For 18 years, Robert Glover has had a dream: to see 1 million Chinese children moved from orphanages into local, loving families. That dream is becoming a reality in a corner of China's Hunan province.
And it was just so remarkable. You know, what was going on in this village was the dream that we had been anticipating.
It all started a few years back when families in Yangjai village set out to change the lives of children in a nearby orphanage.
And I think the amazing thing is they started to really go deep and study the Bible, and they found this bit about widows and orphans, and it really just impacted them.
And these weren't ordinary children.
The children had a very tough life before they were found by the policeman or be collected to the orphanage.
They've been abandoned, and you imagine being abandoned in a city at a very young age and not having anyone to fend for you. And we know where the children have maternal deprivation, they will develop sometimes mental illness, physical illness, and even die.
These children lived in a Chinese government institution. They had the infrastructure and all the facilities, but
they're not able to get any kind of family love or care.
Glover's team discovered something special about the village.
People here, they give their real heart to the children. They love the children, and they support each other.
And that became evident when 70 families became foster parents to 170 children.
All the children were placed with this village from the Kunming orphanage, and up to 99% have difficulties, physically and mentally.
That didn't matter to the villagers. You see, the majority of Yangjai is Christian, and the families knew that this was the right thing to do.
It is quite incredible, because I think most of us, when we wake up in the morning, the first thing we think about is ourselves. These people, they get up and they think of these children, and it's just absolutely phenomenal.
Their act of love had a profound impact, bringing the community together like never before.
This is the dream that has come true. To see, not only the mothers and fathers, but the brothers and sisters, the uncles and aunties, and then the extended family, the whole community come together.
Glover believes what families in Yangjai are doing should be the model for taking care of orphaned and vulnerable children.
And all those people working in institutions are going to suddenly think, oh, I'm going to lose my job. So there's going to be a bit of a fight and a battle. The better way is to say, let's work within the institution and retrain some of the staff to move with the children into the community as support workers.
Glover is the founder of Care for Children, an organization that teaches government-run institutions how to move children from the orphanage into local families. He says he's simply practicing a biblical model.
And we just come back simply to that point. God made the family for children.
So far, Care for Children has placed more than 300,000 Chinese children in families across the country.
The government has realized, the academics have realized, a lot of the NGOs are here. I think it's the church that's behind. The Christian church needs to wake up.
In 2003, the Chinese government invited Glover and his family to move to Beijing so they could introduce this family-based care throughout the country. As a result, the government took a historic step in 2014 by changing legislation to state that family placement is a positive alternative to institutional care.
I shed a tear because it took 17 years for them to change that legislation. It took lots of children's transformations to change that legislation. And I think that is, phenomenal, because that's not about me, that's about a faithful God.
China says it has 576,000 orphans, but outside groups put the number closer to 1 million. Glover says many of the families taking in orphans are Christians.
The biggest Christian revival in world history is happening now in China. And so as that's happening and we're placing children in the family, it's not surprising that the families that are coming forward are the Christians.
For the 70 foster families in Yangjai village, the experience has been life-changing.
特别的爱他们，他们对我们对自己亲生的还要那么想我们也是那样的爱他们。
有的，但是困难总可以解决嘛，困难是少的嘛，是吧？最开心，很开心的爱，
For the children, it has been equally transforming.
我爱爸爸妈妈。
Glover says the smiles here remind him of the dream God put in his heart to help transform the lives of a generation of children across China.
What we're giving these children is an opportunity to have that identity and security and love and nurture in a family and a community.
George Thomas, CBN News.
A biblical mandate come to life, caring for the widows and the orphans. Stay with us. There's more of CBN NewsWatch coming up right after this break. It is now time for your Wednesday Word. It's a message that is meant to inspire. The biggest battle is fought in our own minds. It's a fight to allow faith to rule over fear, and it's a battle to allow love to win at all costs. Remember this: perfect love casts out all fear. With that word, make this a wonderful Wednesday and push forward to make this a wonderful week. That is a wrap for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about always at cbnnews.com. We'd love to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com or also talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make this a wonderful Wednesday. We'll see you right back here come tomorrow.